I found a victim as soon as we had crossed the river. And as soon as I had spotted the man, there came the deepening awareness that everything I had done alone, I would now do with her. She would watch this act, learn from it. I think the intimacy of it made the blood rush to my face. And as I lured the victim out of the tavern, as I teased him, maddened him, and then took him, I knew I was showing off for her, making it a little crueler, more playful. And when the kill came, it had an intensity to it that left me spent afterwards. She loved it. She watched everything as if she could suck up the very vision as she sucked blood. We came together again, and I took her in my arms, and I felt her heat, and she felt my heat. The blood was flooding my brain, and we just held each other, even the thin covering of our garments seeming alien, two burning statues in the dark. After that, the night lost all ordinary dimensions. In fact, it remains one of the longest nights I have ever endured in my immortal life. It was endless and fathomless and dizzying, and there were times when I wanted some defense against its pleasures and its surprises. A writ I had none. And though I said her name over and over to make it natural, she wasn't really Gabrielle yet to me. She was simply she, the one I had needed all of my life, with all of my being. The only woman I had ever loved. Her actual death didn't take long. We sought out an empty cellar room where we remained until it was finished. And there I held on to her and talked to her as it went on. I told her everything that had happened to me again in words this time. I told her all about the tower. I told everything that Magnus had said. I explained all the occurrences of the presence, and how I had become almost used to it and contemptuous of it, and not willing to chase it down. Over and over again I tried to send her images, but it was useless. I didn't say anything about it, neither did she, but she listened very attentively. I talked to her about Nicky's suspicions, which of course he had not mentioned to her at all, and I explained that I feared for him even more now. Another open window, another empty room, and this time witnesses to verify the strangeness of it all. But never mind, I should tell Roget some story that would make it plausible. I should find some means to do right by Nicky, to break the chain of suspicions that was binding him to me. She seemed dimly fascinated by all of this, but it didn't really matter to her. What mattered to her was what lay before her now, and when her death was finished, she was unstoppable. There was no wall that she could not climb, no doors she wouldn't enter, no rooftop terrain to steep. It was as if she did not believe she would live forever. Rather, she thought she had been granted this one night of supernatural vitality, and all things must be known and accomplished before death would come for her at dawn. Many times I tried to persuade her to go home to the tower. As the hours passed, a spiritual exhaustion came over me. I needed to be quiet there, to think on what had happened. I had opened my eyes and see only blackness for an instant, but she wanted only experiment, adventure. She proposed that we enter the private dwellings of mortals now to search for the clothes she needed. She laughed when I said that I always purchase my clothes in the proper way. "We can hear if a house is empty," she said, moving swiftly through the streets, her eyes on the windows of the darkened mansions. "We can hear if the servants are asleep." It made perfect sense, though I'd never attempted such a thing, and I was soon following her up narrow back stairs and down carpeted corridors, amazed at the ease of it all, and fascinated by the details of the informal chambers in which mortals lived. I found I liked to touch personal things, fans, snuff boxes, the newspaper the master of the house had been reading, his boots on the hearth. It was as much fun as peering into windows, but she had her purpose. In a lady's dressing room in a large Saint Germain house, she found a fortune in lavish clothes to fit her new and fuller form. I helped to peel off the old taffeta and to dress her up in pink velvet, gathering her hair in tidy curls under an ostrich plume hat. I was shocked again by the sight of her and the strange eerie feeling of wandering with her through this over-furnished house full of mortal scents. She gathered objects from the dressing table, a vial of perfume, a small gold pair of scissors. She looked at herself in the glass. I went to kiss her again, and she didn't stop me. We were lovers kissing. And that was the picture we made together, white-faced lovers, as we rushed down the servant stairs and out into the late evening streets. We wandered in and out of the opera and the comédie before they closed, then through the ball in the Palais Royal. It delighted her the way mortals saw us, but did not see us, how they were drawn to us and completely deceived. We heard the presence very sharply after that, as we explored the churches, then again it was gone. We climbed belfries to survey our kingdom and afterwards huddled in crowded coffee houses for a little while, merely to feel and smell the mortals around us, to exchange secret glances, to laugh softly, tête-à-tête. She fell into dream states, looking at the steam rising from the mug of coffee, at the layers of cigarette smoke hovering around the lamps. She loved the dark, empty streets and the fresh air more than anything else. She wanted to climb up into the limbs of the trees and onto the rooftops again. She marveled that I didn't always travel through the city by means of the rooftops or ride about atop carriages as we had done. Sometime after midnight we were in the deserted market, just walking, hand in hand. We had just heard the presence again, but neither of us could discern a disposition in it as we had before. It was puzzling me, but everything around us was astonishing her still. The refuse, the cats that chased the vermin, the bizarre stillness, the way that the darkest combers of the metropolis held no danger for us. She remarked on that. Perhaps it was that which enchanted her most of all, that we could slip past the dens of thieves unheard, that we could easily defeat anyone who should be fool enough to trouble us, that we were both visible and invisible, palpable and utterly unaccountable. I didn't rush her or question her. I was merely borne along with her and content and sometimes lost in my own thoughts about this unfamiliar content. And when a handsome, slightly built young man came riding through the darkened stalls, I watched him as if he were an apparition, something coming from the land of the living into the land of the dead. He reminded me of Nicolas because of his dark hair and dark eyes, and something innocent, yet brooding in the face. He shouldn't have been in the market alone. He was younger than Nicky and very foolish indeed. But just how foolish he was I didn't realize until she moved forward like a great pink feline, and brought him down almost silently from the horse. I was shaken. The innocence of her victims didn't trouble her. She didn't fight my moral battles, but then I didn't fight them anymore either. So why should I judge her? Yet the ease with which she slew the young man, gracefully breaking his neck, when the little drink she took was not enough to kill him, angered me, though it had been extremely exciting to watch. She was colder than I. She was better at all of it, I thought. Magnus had said, show no mercy. But had he meant us to kill when we did not have to kill? It came clear in an instant why she'd done it. She tore off the pink velvet girdle and skirts right there and put on the boy's clothes. She'd chosen him for the fit of the clothes, and to describe it more truly, as she put on his garments, she became the boy. She put on his cream silk stockings and scarlet breeches, the lace shirt and the yellow waistcoat, and then the scarlet frock coat, and even took the scarlet ribbon from the boy's hair. Something in me rebelled against the charm of it, her standing so boldly in these new garments with all her hair still full over her shoulders, looking more the lion's mane now than the lovely mass of woman's tresses it had been moments before. Then I wanted to ravage her. I closed my eyes. When I looked at her again, my head was swimming with all that we'd seen and done together. I couldn't endure being so near to the dead boy. She tied all of her blonde hair together with the scarlet ribbon and let the long locks hang down her back. She laid the pink dress over the body of the boy to cover him, and she buckled on his sword and drew it once and sheathed it again, and took his cream-colored roquelaure. Let's go then, darling, she said, and she kissed me. I couldn't move. I wanted to go back to the tower and just be close to her. She looked at me and pressed my hand to spur me on, and she was almost immediately running ahead. She had to feel the freedom of her limbs, and I found myself pounding after her, having to exert myself to catch up. That had never happened with me. And an immortal, of course. She seemed to be flying, and the sight of her flashing through the boarded-up stalls and the heaps of garbage made me almost lose my balance. Again I stopped. She came back to me and kissed me. But there's no real reason for me to dress that way anymore, is there? She asked. She might have been talking to a child. No, of course there isn't, I said. Maybe it was a blessing that she couldn't read my thoughts. I couldn't stop looking at her legs, so perfect in the cream-colored stockings and the way that the frock coat gathered at her small waist. Her face was like a flame. Remember in those times you never saw a woman's legs like that? Or the silk of breeches tight over her small belly or thighs? But she was not really a woman now, was she, any more than I was a man? For one silent second the horror of it all bled through. Come, I want to take to the roofs again, she said. I want to go to the Boulevard du Temple. I should like to see the theatre, the one that you purchased and then shut up. Will you show that to me? She was studying me as she asked this. Of course, I said. Why not? We had 2 hours left of the endless night when we finally returned to the Ile Saint-Louis and stood on the moonlit quay. Far down the paved street I saw my mare tethered where I'd left her. Perhaps she had gone unnoticed in the confusion that must have followed our departure. We listened carefully for any sign of Nicky or Roget, but the house appeared deserted and dark. "They are near, however," she whispered. "I think somewhere further down." "Nicky's flat?" I said. "And from Nicky's flat someone could be watching the mare?" "A servant posted to watch in case we came back." "Better to leave the horse and steal another," she said. "No, it's mine," I said, but I felt her grip on my hand tighten. Our old friend again, the presence, and this time it was moving along the Seine, on the other side of the island and toward the left bank. "Gone," she said. "Let's go. We can steal another mount." "Wait, I'm going to try to get her to come to me, to break the tether. Can you do that?" "We'll see." I concentrated all my will on the mare, telling her silently to back up, to pull loose from the bond holding her, and come. In a second, the horse was prancing, jerking at the leather. Then she reared, and the tether broke. She came clattering towards us over the stones, and we were on her immediately, Gabrielle leaping up first and I right behind her, gathering up what was left of the rein as I urged the horse to go into a dead run. As we crossed the bridge, I felt something behind us, a commotion, the tumult of mortal minds, but we were lost in the black echo chamber of the Ile de la Cité. When we reached the tower, I lighted the resin torch and took her down with me into the dungeon. There was no time now to show her the upper chamber. Her eyes were glassy, and she looked about herself sluggishly as we descended the screw stairs. Her scarlet clothes gleamed against the dark stones. Ever so slightly she recoiled from the dampness. The stench from the lower prison cells disturbed her, but I told her gently it was nothing to do with us. And once we had entered the huge burial crypt, the smell was shut out by the heavy iron-studded door. The torchlight spread out to reveal the low arches of the ceiling, the three great sarcophagi with their deeply graven images. She did not seem afraid. I told her that she must see if she could lift the stone lid of the one she chose for herself. I might have to do it for her. She studied the three carved figures, and after a moment's reflection she chose not the woman's sarcophagus, but the one with the knight in armor carved on the top of it. And slowly she pushed the stone lid out of place so she could look into the space within. Not as much strength as I possessed, but strong enough. "Don't be afraid," I said. "No, you mustn't ever worry on that account," she said softly. Her voice had a lovely frayed sound to it, a faint timbre of sadness. She appeared to be dreaming as she ran her hands over the stone. "By this hour," she said, "she might have already been laid out, your mother, and the room would be full of evil smells and the smoke of hundreds of candles. Think how humiliating it is. Death. Strangers would have taken off her clothes, bathed her, dressed her. Strangers seen her emaciated and defenseless in the final sleep, and those whispering in the corridors would have talked of their good health, and how they have never had the slightest illness in their families, no consumption in their families. The poor marquise, they would have said, they would have been wondering, did she have any money of her own? Did she leave it to her sons? And the old woman, when she came to collect the soiled sheets, she would have stolen one of the rings off the dead woman's hand." I nodded. "And so we stand in this dungeon crypt," I wanted to say, "and we prepare to lie down on stone beds, with only rats to keep us company. But it's infinitely better than that, isn't it? It has its dark splendor. To walk the nightmare terrain forever." She looked wan, cold all over. Sleepily she drew something out of her pocket. It was the golden scissors she'd taken from the ladies' table in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, sparkling in the light of the torch like a bauble. "No, mother," I said. My own voice startled me. It leapt out echoing too sharply under the arched ceiling. The figures on the other sarcophagi seemed merciless witnesses. The hurt in my heart stunned me. Evil sound, the snipping, the shearing. Her hair fell down in great long locks on the floor. "Ooh, mother." She looked down at it, scattering it silently with the tip of her boot. And then she looked up at me. And she was a young man now, certainly, the short hair curling against her cheek. But her eyes were closing. She reached out to me, and the scissors fell out of her hands. "Rest now," she whispered. "It's only the rising sun," I said to reassure her. She was weakening sooner than I did. She turned away from me and moved towards the coffin. I lifted her and her eyes shut, pushing the lid of the sarcophagus even farther to the right. I laid her down inside, letting her pliant limbs arrange themselves naturally and gracefully. Her face had already smoothed itself into sleep, her hair framing her face with a young boy's locks. Dead, she seemed, and gone, the magic undone. I kept looking at her. I let my teeth cut into the tip of my tongue, until I felt the pain and tasted the hot blood there. Then bending low, I let the blood fall in tiny shining droplets on her lips. Her eyes opened. Violet blue and glittering, they stared up at me. The blood flowed into her opening mouth, and slowly she lifted her head to meet my kiss. My tongue passed into her. Her lips were cold. My lips were cold. but the blood was hot, and it flowed between us. "Good night, my darling one," I said. "My dark angel Gabrielle." She sank back into stillness as I let her go. I closed the stone over her.